AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center. Sunshine this morning, stronger thunderstorms as we heat up in the afternoon, a high of 89. Severe storms could hang around for the overnight, low 73, currently 77. Next news coming up at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Retire Chicago. Tune in Saturday mornings at 8 to Retire Chicago with John McNamara of McNamara Capital.
When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. As I said, New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof worried about knee-jerk liberalism. I'd suggest that kneecapping leftism is more of a danger as the cultural Marxists metastasize into street thugs in places like Portland, Oregon. Andy Ngo, journalist who contributes to Colette.com, and a Portland resident who's documented the thuggery of Antifa. Antifa described by leading Democrat POTUS contender Joe Biden as, quote, a courageous group of Americans, unquote. Defended routinely on CNN, with the exception of Jake Tapper, who at least has the integrity to document other instances where Antifa goons have attacked journalists. Andy Ngo wasn't the first. But it was a severe beating, and it was all captured on video, not much to the willful blindness of the D.C. press corps. Andy Ngo went on with Tucker Carlson last night to explain exactly what happened and the injuries he suffered.
On Saturday, documenting this protest that was organized by Antifa and its allies, we were a literal stone's throw away from Portland's most important institutions of the rule of law, the courthouses, the sheriff's office, the central police precinct. While hearing people chant, "No hate, no fear," I'm suddenly bashed on the back of my head from behind. And from there, I'm a very passive person. I've never been in a fight. It took me a few seconds to realize that I was actually even hitting my head. When I realized what was happening, it was too late. A mob of people, all dressed in black and wearing masks, started beating me with their fists, and some of them used objects to hit me. I don't know how many people were involved. It seemed like 5, 10, 15, or 20. It could have been that many. They beat me so much that I lost control of my GoPro camera that I was holding, which was then stolen from me. And when I thought it was over, I was wrong. I put my arms up to try to shield my face, as well as to signal to them that I was surrendering and that I wasn't there to fight. But that really signaled to them to be more aggressive. So then they started dumping what I believe were milkshakes and eggs, throwing it at my face, which blinded me so I couldn't see. And I was kicked some more, punched some more. And all this time I kept thinking, where are the police? I could still see the Multnomah County Justice Center in front of me, but no police ever arrived. I eventually stumbled away, bleeding, across the park, and I lost my balance, so I sat down on the ground in front of the courthouse. And from there, a medic SWAT team informed me that in order to get an ambulance to be taken to a hospital, I would have to walk to the police precinct. In other words, walk back in the direction of the demonstrators who just attacked me. Later that night, after arriving in the emergency room, I had a CT scan, which confirmed that I was diagnosed with a brain hemorrhage.
Two things about what Ngo said. One, did you hear that part about how he said, basically, he's a passive guy, he's never been in a fight. I made it clear I had no interest in fighting, and that only made them more aggressive. That's what a thug does, prey on the weak. They see that he is defenseless, he won't fight back, and that is like a red cape to a bull. That says something about the element you're dealing with, number one. Number two, the condemnations, the responses, or the acknowledgement that this happened at all. How many Democrat presidential candidates have weighed in? I know Andrew Yang did, denouncing Antifa. Have you heard anybody else? The leading contenders? Leadership of the left? I haven't. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Dominic Green, who's a critic, historian, and the life and arts editor of Spectator USA. Dominic, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan.
So you wrote on this topic, the headline of your piece, Did Andy Ngo get what he deserved? Well, did he?
No, and nobody deserves to be treated like that. In a society of laws, you're supposed to be able to walk down the street with a camera in front of a courthouse without being assaulted by a gang. And this appalling attack is all the more astonishing for the fact that here we have as many as a dozen white people attacking an Asian American, attacking a racial minority. And yet, if you look online afterwards, the same people who denounced the purported attackers of Jussie Smollett are defending, in effect, this. They're saying he was asking for it in some way, so he got what he deserved. In other words, he had it coming. This is an astonishing, immoral way to respond to the kind of incident which damages everybody's life. You cannot conduct politics in this manner.
Well,
what is going on in the city of Portland?
Right. Well, that's the thing. What's wrong with Portland police, and why aren't they inserting themselves at the very least to protect journalists and to protect residents?
Well, Andy Ngo wrote for Spectator USA late last year saying, what's wrong with Portland? And his conclusion was that the police were effectively intimidated. They want a quiet life. They have a massive and well-organized ANTIFA group with a lot of support, passive support from plenty of other people in a very left-wing city. The police simply don't want to tangle with a large number of people. And when you look at Antifa, you see the film, people wearing assault gloves, which are like a mailed fist, basically, hitting Andy Ngo in the head. These people are coming to fight. They're armed. They're wearing helmets. They're wearing gloves and pads. They're preparing, weaponry, in effect, for these demonstrations. So what can the police do? Well, they're going to end up fighting in the street with them, or they're going to end up turning a blind eye and hoping that it doesn't end up in a riot. That if anybody from the other side turns up, then, of course, then you have people fighting in the street. But Andy Ngo is not some extreme right-winger or something. Andy Ngo is a serious journalist, a very liberal-minded person, and as he said, he's not there to fight. He's there as a professional to document what's going on. And this is why he was targeted. He wasn't just attacked by a dozen people because
they know who he
is. Be
is.
there with a camera.
They know who he is.
You can hear them saying, they're saying Andy Ngo, and they're crowing about it. They're delighted that they've got him. And he himself had said before, he had become increasingly concerned for his safety, that it was no longer possible for him to document what Antifa were doing in public on the streets in Portland. He no longer felt safe doing it because he was hearing and he was receiving messages, and he's posted them on Twitter before, of people saying, we're going to get you. They published his address. They said, we own the city and we're going to stop you.
You know what else is noticeable if you watch the video of the attack? Nobody intercedes. Nobody intercedes to try and stop it.
No.
It is, basically this is mob turf, and so the mob will do what it does.
Yes, people are easily intimidated, but there's also an element in this which is ideological, in the sense that terrorists swim in a community in the way that fish swim in a sea. You have a small number of people, perhaps, who want to commit acts of violence. You have a much larger number of people who are their friends and their families and are not necessarily going to call the police if they know somebody plans on committing what is this, an assault and robbery in public. And then you have a larger group of people who share a kind of sentimental attachment to it. Their hearts are in the right place. And you can see this, I believe, that continuum is expressed in the responses of the people around them on the demonstration who did not defend Andy Ngo. And then you can see the next level of sentimental affiliation with it in the way that most of the media simply acted as if it didn't happen. And then you see the final ring of support, which is, hey, their hearts are in the right place, even if they do get a little out of hand, in the silence of Democratic presidential candidates.
Well, at least Jake Tapper had mentioned that, reporters should not be attacked by ANTIFA. But Andy wasn't the only gentleman who was attacked in Portland. There was 2 elderly men. I don't know if you saw it. One was beaten with a crowbar, needed 25 stitches. The other had a split, his head was split open by nunchucks. I mean, these people are carrying around lethal weapons, and they're not even patting them down or trying to arrest them. I don't understand.
I don't understand either. As an immigrant to the United States, I don't understand it, because one thing I do understand about the United States is if you go armed and you intend to commit a crime, then you may well or should tangle with the police, who will also have come armed. The idea that you can attack someone with a nunchuck or a stick or anything like this in the street, in front of the police, under their noses, and they will not intervene, is astounding, and it gives license for further violence. And of course, this thing intensifies, and sooner or later, somebody is going to get killed as a bystander, as an observer. Someone who's just going around the corner to the shops to buy a newspaper is going to be caught in this. And then are Antifa going to blame that on Donald Trump?
Is this, are we to understand this as a one-off group and a one-off incident or 2 or 3 or 4? I note that another story similar in kind to this out this weekend, a staffer for Mayor Pete there suggested on Twitter that that the next time somebody confronts Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz in Florida, instead of throwing a milkshake on him, throw a bottle of urine on him. And I just this is Nigel Farage got hit with the milkshake. Are we seeing an escalation in this sort of thing, or are we likely to?
Absolutely, we are. All ideological driven things like this always escalate, and violence escalates. This is the dynamic of it, and it starts off being funny or being cool in some way, and it ends up with incitement to maim and murder. You don't go out with a nunchuck unless you want to hospitalize somebody. You don't take weapons to a public demonstration unless you want to fight. And yes, if we have a situation where elected representatives can be thrown out of restaurants or barracked in the street or physically attacked or shot at a baseball game, then that's an open-ended dynamic of intensifying violence.
And just in terms of the press coverage of this, Clara Lehman over at Quillette has been tweeting a lot of press coverage, and it's rather remarkable some of the characterizations and where the D.C. press corps outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post are focused. New York Times, Mike Baker focusing on whether or not the mix of the milkshake included quick dry cement or not, sort of missing the forest for the twigs, I think, is part of the point, in addition to characterizing, going to your point about sort of giving implicit rationalizations. Quillette is a right-wing magazine. Andy Ngo had previously done journalism about how multiculturalism had failed in London. So why bring all of these matters up, the nature of his work, if you're not trying to justify what happened to him?
Yes, and if you ask Quillette, they will say that they are centre-right or classical liberal and so on. As far as I understand, they're essentially very rational sociologists before they have a political position. They believe in reason and free speech, which I do believe is still part of the American way too.
Yeah.
Why bring these in unless to minimize the offense or to say that in some way anybody who gets in the way has it coming? Now, there is a case to be made that if you are, say, a member of a group like the Proud Boys, who are kind of a right-wing gang, an extremist gang who are active in Portland, if you're a member of the Proud Boys and you go to the demo, you can expect perhaps to face off against Antifa and so on. That's very, very different to going there, as Andy says, as a civilian, as a neutral, as an observer. And some of the things that I've seen online about this are absolutely astounding. They amount to saying that because he has documented the activities of a quasi-terrorist group, because he has photographed this group in breaking the law, he should therefore effectively be punished or silenced. That documenting people in committing crimes, in other words, is in itself the problem. and he has therefore to be stamped out. It's an astonishing thing, and it's quite shocking that it's not only a fringe group which would be saying this, it's people who, as I say, have a sentimental attachment to a certain kind of law breaking, if it's by their team, not by anybody else, but just by the ideologues of their team.
Yeah, Colette editorial. We're hoping that our fellow journalists might awaken from the delusion that Antifa is a well-intentioned band of anti-fascists with a few bad apples sullying the cause. Well, Quillette editors can hope, but there doesn't seem to be any indication that that's going to happen. He is Dominic Green. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you have intentions